Good evening, it's Alec here from the Scotch Malt Whisky Society New Zealand. You might have noticed that we've not been able to do tastings for the last Outturn and this one as well, for reasons which are quite obvious. However, we thought it would be nice for you to be able to have some idea of the whiskies that will be in the Outturn, even though you can't taste them in the form of a tasting. And it's my melancholy duty to do that job for you. So I have here the first two of the whiskies. There is going to be 6 in the Outturn, and we're going to do them in pairs, just as a sort of point of interest really, draw some comparisons between the two, and we'll make our way through the whole Outturn. Tough job, I know. So we have here a pair of really interesting whiskies. Number 1.214 here, obviously in the Society's parlance, the 1 stands for the fact that this is the first distillery that was ever bottled by the Society, way back in 1983. And the 214 means that this is the 214th cask bottled from that distillery. And then we have the 66.148 here as well. And this is a real treat, one of my favourite distilleries, and one that we haven't had for a little while. So I'm going to draw some points of comparison between these two, because despite the stylistic difference, this being a peated and this an unpeated whisky, and the regional difference as well, there are actually a few points of comparison. So without further ado, we'll kick off. Hopefully you can see this. So we have here a really interesting whisky, as I said, from distillery number 1. It's a single first fill ex-bourbon barrel, American white oak. And this in itself is a significant point of difference. If you're familiar with the distillery's own bottlings, they are without exception ex-sherry cask matured whiskies. So it's quite an opportunity to taste this one without the influence of sherry casks, and maybe to pick up some of the distillery characteristics. One of the more interesting points about this distillery is that they're one of the very few distilleries left in Scotland which operate direct firing for their distillation equipment. And the effect of this is that there's a sort of a toasty, almost burnt flavour coming through, especially in the finish, which is very, very hard to find nowadays. Let's have a wee look at this one. So on the nose, very, very fresh fruit dominated. Lovely honey note. Very, very juicy. Very fresh. Let's have a wee taste. Very much confirmed on the palate, but with a sweet herbal, heathery herbal, floral herbal coming through. And then definitely a bit of that sort of burnt, caramelly, almost brandish character on the finish. See how water affects this one. It's quite high strength, 58.6%. But it really didn't need water. Let's see what happens. Bit of a eucalypt note coming out, drying on the side of the palate. Really interesting whisky, and as I said, quite cool to see in this form. A sip of water. Now we'll move on to number 2. And this one, the connection that I mentioned, is that this distillery actually used to do direct firing as well, and quite recently, not in the time that this one was distilled, but until 2001, the distillery continued to practice direct firing, and they were very concerned that they would lose the distillery style in the changeover. And so they went through quite a lengthy process to try and retain that sort of burnt character that I was talking about here with distillery number 1. It took them 7 or 8 months, but they came out with a system. So usually in a still, you'll be using steam coils to heat the wash or the spirit, or the low wine, sorry. And what they did was they introduced kinks into the coils, which produced the hot spots that they used to get during the direct firing days. And that's allowed them to maintain this sort of burnt character, the spiciness that was distinctive from the old production methods. On the nose, not much smokiness. This distillate is peated to between 10 and 15 parts per million, so by no means as strong as what you'd find on Islay, but certainly much stronger than what you'd find in most of the Highlands. And the distillery was made the distillate that way from the very early days. The distillery was founded in the very late 1890s, and they wanted to introduce a peaty character to the blend that they were making at that time, in fact still make, and hence the smoke. The other note you get on the nose here is a faint fruitiness, and I'm hoping that that's going to come through more strongly on the palate as well, because this typically is quite a fruity whiskey as well. Ooh. Smoke definitely coming through really strongly, but that nice sweet fruity character as well. Ashy, quite sort of tarry. It's quite a dirty whiskey this, but with a nice sweetness cutting through as well. The water a bit light, is still not a lot of smoke on the nose. Sweeter maybe. That's how we taste. Really oily, sweet, fruity, and then that lovely smokiness to round it out. Rather nice drop. Well, I hope you enjoyed this first little mini tasting, and there'll be a couple more to come, going through the range available for the April Outturn. We'll see you in the next one.